doesn't seem to be going to YouTube. Oh, now it is.
Good morning, folks. Welcome to Community Church of Boston. And welcome to our live stream on Zoom and on YouTube. We are so glad that you are with us this morning on this sunny day in Copley Square. We start with a candle lighting. We light this candle. Our recently very close friend to John and Rachel this morning. And also the news that we just heard about Stuart Rose, the brother of Landon Rose, Martha Leader's partner. Martha is one of our fine musicians who regularly joins us here at Community Church. This adds to the Maine connection that is what this program. And I'll talk about that more, but first I'll just sing this little sort of doxology that's every time we light this candle. Written by Cindy Callett of Maine as well, and of Bloomington, Indiana. If I stood out in the rain night, I only light a candle 1,000,000 miles away. Would you lay down your fire as I raised mine? Would you not kill again? And oh, when you're near me, oh my love, oh, my joy, there's nothing ever to weary me. Oh, my darling one. And we say, John Berman, presente. And the audience says, presente. And we say, Stuart Rose, presente. And the audience says, presente. I did a show with John and Rachel Nicholas last night in West Roxbury at the Theater of Parker Church, and it was just a magical evening. It was a really nice audience there, and we were joined by our beloved Rob Flax playing wonderful, intuitive violin. He is the quickest study I know, and just a wonderful, gifted violin player and nerd extraordinaire. Rob Flax, and Sue Kranz was there playing flute. It was just a magnificent evening. And we get a little icing on the cake. We get to hear John and Rachel this morning. Folks, will you welcome from Maine, Camden that is, John and Rachel Nicholas to join us this morning at Community Church.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, you couldn't get a more gracious and generous host than Dean Stevens, who just is a mensch. Dean Stevens is a mensch. Not everyone you could say that about. We're gonna start our program doing a song, since we're sharing this service with Robert Shetterly, who's a painter. We're gonna do a song that references maybe one of the most famous works of art in history, and you'll recognize it, or her, when we get to it. And this song is called End of the Day.
See the cracks in the bell and the scars on the moon, wide awake in the dark when the sun comes up too soon. The Mona Lisa smiles in a secret way. That's what you got at the end of the day. bloom is off the rose, and the birds are on the wing. You pulled your card, and the queen began to sing. The Mona Lisa smiles. What more can you say? Well, that's what you got at the end of the day. You just want to know why she's never down, no matter what happens all around. You would love to be that way at the end of the day. See the rain coming in, so you ran for the gate. You know the joy of love and the twist of fate. The Mona Lisa smiles like she knows the way. That's what you got at the end of the day. You just want to know why she's never down, no matter what happens all around. You would love to be that way at the end of the day. The Mona Lisa holds your gaze, staring through the veil of time. Is it really just a smile that makes her look so sublime? The band's all here, but the choir's running late. Something's out of tune, but the spirit is great. The Mona Lisa smiles like there's no other way. And that's what you got at the end of the day. You just want to know why she's never down, no matter what happens all around. You would love to be that way at the end of the day. You would love to be that way at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John and Rachel. I'll also mention that here in our auditorium, we have a beautiful display of paintings from the Impressionist painter Diane Esmond. This is a display that's been up for a couple of months, and it's been a very successful sale of paintings of Diane Esmond. She died in 1982, but her son is a very active member of our church and provided all these paintings of her work. And we'll probably, I think I'll get on my phone and display them at some point during the program today. But thank you, John and Rachel. And I just got to thinking about what a marvelous set of coincidences that brought today's program to us. We had a postponement of Roger Kabler, who is a filmmaker, will be with us he was going to be here this morning and will be with us in May. His subject is the comedian Robin Williams. But just the moment that he postponed, it just so happened I got an email from another filmmaker named Dick Kane, who's a friend of ours from the Blue Hill Peninsula, and I've come to know him from a series of concerts that we did, holiday concerts at the Congregational Church in Blue Hill, and the email was about a film that he did about Robert Shetterly, and I emailed Dick Kane, who connected us with Rob, who is with us this morning. It's a marvelous, magnificent thing, because I just have this just deep sense that Rob's work is just so in line with Community Church and our Peace and Justice congregation and our Peace and Justice mission and our Sacco and Vanzetti Awards, which many have been the subjects of Robert's portraits. But I want to tell you about some other Maine connections besides John and Rachel and Rob this morning. There's also John Lothrop, who was the son of our minister for 30-year minister, Donald Lothrop. John Lothrop lived in Belfast and passed away 2 years ago. And I came to know his wife, Michaela, who now lives not in Belfast, but in, what's the name of the lake? It's the name of a town on Route 1 further down. It starts Damariscotta. Boy, that's one of those memory blocks that I have, certain things that just like, you have to, Damariscotta, I got to just practice that one so I don't, anyway, that's one connection. And through that, I'll mention some connections between Community Church and Maine. Donald Lothrop retired in Maine, lived up there about 25 years, passed away in 2003 or so. But through that connection, I'll mention a couple other speakers who spoke here numerous times. One is Scott Nearing. Maybe you look in our archives 30 or 40 times. Scott and Helen Nearing had their house right there, probably right near Rob's house. And it's still there, and it celebrates their majestic work. Scott spoke here just so many times in our archive. We had a program about him about a year and a half ago by Greg Jolie, who is sort of the Scott Nearing archivist and on the board of that center that's there in I think it's Brooksville. Am I right? Right up there. And so I'll mention another great connection, which is Frances Perkins, who spoke here twice during the 50s. And the name is not very well known, but it's the first, she was the first woman cabinet member of a president, which was FDR. And she's from Maine as well. And probably the reason for the connection was Donald Lothrop, who brought her in the 50s to speak after she had been Secretary of Labor for FDR and is the seriously responsible force behind unemployment insurance, Social Security, workman's compensation, the 8-hour. It's just remarkable. And I'll mention that her grandson, Frances Perkins, lived in a town that's escaping me as well. That's right there near Damariscotta. And there's a Frances Perkins Center, and her grandson, who's about my age, I believe, is one of the authors in this book, and I'll talk about it. And I'm dying to get him to speak as well about his grandmother, who spoke here several times. I wish we had the transcripts of those, because this is a marvelous person who is not very well known in the history of this country. Anyway, one of the essays in this book is this Perkins grandson, whose name is escaping me. I'll have to look it up, put my glasses on, and I won't. But the reason I tell you about this book is that it is the topic of an upcoming Sunday. This is called Talking to the Girls by Edwige Giunta and Marianne Trasciatti. And this is a series of essays that are recollections on the Triangle Shirtwaist disaster in New York, 1911, where a fire started, and you know the story. The fire started on the 8th floor, and on the 9th, 10th, 11th were a bunch of young girls, mostly immigrants, working in the garment district of New York, and about 130 of them jumped to their death. And this is recollections of some of the descendants of people who witnessed that, or who were victims, or who were influenced by that. And one of the people influenced was Frances Perkins herself, who was a couple blocks away when this fire broke out, and went and saw that. And it was something that got her working on occupational safety, and became the main driving force behind her career. So there's another Maine connection. All else that I want to say is just tell you that we have some wonderful programs coming up, including this program about the Triangle disaster. The anniversary of that is in late March, and we're having these two authors, as well as one of the authors of one of the essays, Michelle Fazio, the three of them will be joining us. Michelle will be here in person because she's a longtime friend of the church. We have on our 3rd floor the archive of the late Robert Datilio, which deals with the Sacco-Vanzetti case. Lots of primary resources from the Sacco-Vanzetti case are up there on our 3rd floor. And Michelle is a professor from the University of North Carolina, who's very interested in early anarchism and in the Sacco-Vanzetti trial and case. And she will be with us, joining us for that program. That's on March 19th. March 12th, a wonderful program. That's next Sunday. Katie Miranda, I think we're focusing on art, and art as a vehicle for social justice and freedom and struggle. And Katie Miranda is a jeweler of half Palestinian origin and half Mexican origin. She lives in the Bay Area. And she also is a magnificent podcaster. She has on her website, you can find there, a lot of interviews with different people, especially on the topic of Palestine. But she does beautiful jewelry as well as painting. I happen to have her painting, which we feature especially during Easter. It's called the Pietà. It's kind of like Mary bringing Jesus off the cross, but in this case, Mary has a hijab and Jesus has a keffiyeh, which is kind of like such a window into what's going on right now in the West Bank, and it's turning into the Ku Klux Klan, the pre-civil rights era segregation South in the very West Bank. And we call on this government to end our support for that horror that's going on there. I get to blabbing and I can't stop blabbing, and I have too many things to talk about here on the table, but I won't, because I want to get on with our program. We have another Mainer who I just want to spend a little time with. His name is Reverend Rob McCall. When we're in Maine, which we spend 2 weeks there every summer on Swans Island, we tune in to WERU, magnificent community radio station, and we listen on Sundays to Awanajo Almanac, which we call our 5-Minute Church. And we're gonna hear a 5-Minute Church this morning with Reverend Rob McCall. He hasn't been broadcasting his recent almanacs because I think there's some health issues, and we send good thoughts. It's either his way or his partner Rebecca's way in this moment by celebrating his work, which is about our need to reconnect with nature, and it's called the Awanajo Almanac. Let's listen to that now, Amar. Thanks.
Sun's gonna shine in my back door someday. March wind's gonna blow my blues all away. An old blues song from the Carter Family, 1934. Hello everyone, I'm Rob McCall, and this is the Awanajo Almanac, devoted to feeling at home in nature and breaking down the wall of hostility between us and the rest of creation. This is the almanac for March 11 to 18, 2022, the full worm moon. And here are some natural events for this quarter moon. The aching anticipation that we feel for the coming of spring is like that of a thirsty man for an ice cold beer, or like a lost puppy for home, or like a lover for the beloved. It's a favorite subject of great poets, but it's a feeling known by every creature. There's a time in the depths of winter when it's almost too painful to even think about spring for fear of losing the strength to go on. But that time is now past, and we'll be getting real tastes of spring. Sort of like stealing a strip of bacon while waiting for that big lumberjack breakfast to be served. And the beauty of it all is that this feast will be served up for everyone who takes breath, rich or poor, high or low, great or small. From the eagle high above to the earthworm underground. It's a universal banquet that feeds the soul and blows our blues all away. Here's a field and forest report. Last week we were seeing a troop of starlings hopping single file along the narrow path to the compost, looking for any tiny patches of bare ground where they might be some sustenance. This week, the snow cover is shrinking fast, and it'll soon be gone, although we know we could get blasted again before it's over. 2 weeks ago, we had reports of bluebirds in their gray, drab winter plumage feeding on winter berries out on Monhegan Island. And this week, they're showing up in their bright blue courting clothes right across the Benjamin River from our headquarters here. And they're getting the royal treatment, too. Although the snow's been sparse, we've had some real old-fashioned cold in late January and through most of February. Now, we're hoping that this may knock back populations of brown-tailed caterpillars, Euproctis chrysocerea, that have been surging in recent years. Probably the least welcome of our summer visitors, with a few possible exceptions. It resembles the eastern tent caterpillar a little bit, but has 2 red spots on its back, and sure enough, it has brown on its tail. The brown tail is a fierce defoliator of oaks and other deciduous trees, and its fuzz can cause a nasty rash, so don't touch. And infestation is just plain horrible. But as with other species, overpopulations eventually crash from disease. Pesticides tend to prolong the damage. And here's a saltwater report. The word is that our friend Paul Anderson is stepping down as skipper of the Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries on the waterfront in Stonington. MCCF was founded almost 20 years ago to bring the vast local knowledge and expertise of fishermen together with scientists and regulators to maintain healthy fish stocks and a robust fishing economy. Paul is a man of many talents, and we doubt that his rubber boots will sit idly by the kitchen door for very long. And here's a rank opinion. Russia's horrific war of aggression in Ukraine is like many previous wars, with atrocities against civilians and economic and environmental destruction. But is also different from other wars too, as our grandson pointed out to us, because this time there are millions of cameras reporting every detail of the carnage to the entire world. War makers prefer secrecy because they know that what they do is shameful, not courageous or glorious as they claim. As in our wars of aggression in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq, killing women, children, and the elderly is shameful. Destroying homes, shops, markets, and crops is shameful. Ravaging the environment with chemical weapons is shameful. Wars of aggression are shameful. So let these shameful acts be brought fully into the light for all the world to see. And finally, a seed pod. This one from the prophet Isaiah. They shall turn their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they study war anymore. Well, that's the almanac for this quarter moon, but don't take it from me. Go out and see for yourself.
Thank you, Reverend Rob McCall. We send thoughts your way for you and your family. He's not doing that weekly report. He hasn't since last November. This was from last year, but I just love that 5-minute church. And we can go home now, except that we have a bunch of stuff and really great stuff. I want to show you these beads. I don't know if you can see them, but these are called mazbaha. They are prayer beads, Muslim prayer beads. These are made by Shukri Abu Bakr. He is sitting in a prison where he's serving 65 years. He's one of these members of the Holy Land Foundation, 5 Palestinian Muslim men who started a very successful charity to benefit children in Gaza and the West Bank, who after September 11th became targets of the United States' wrath in the aftermath of hysteria of 9/11, and their foundation, the biggest charity, Muslim charity in the United States, was closed down, and they were all arrested and taken into custody and tried after 2 trials, found guilty, and 3 of the 5 are still there after 15 years. Shukri and Mufid and what's the last one's name? I have a letter addressed to him. We have 2 of these here in the church, and I've just ordered some more from Nida, who is Shukri's daughter. And if you would like one of these, or if you'd like to come look at them here at the church, they can be found, and they are made out of bread and water, formed into either little balls or other shapes like little stones, and put in a string of beads to be a prayer beads, like that. And you can get your own prayer beads here at the church. They're along with a whole bunch of other Palestinian handicrafts and products that we have here from the Olive Branch Fair Trade store in Martha's Vineyard. But this is the one that's just really grabbing me right now, the Mazbaha prayer beads. And I want to show you this poster that our marvelous Crystal Rollins Jackson designed, that's now on a big sandwich board out in front of the church on Boylston Street, where 10,000 people pass by every day and see this poster, Free the Holy Land Foundation. And we are committed to making that happen. Another thing about that is this book that we have for sale that's by Miko Peled, who spoke when we gave them our annual Sacco and Vanzetti Award on December 18th, 2022. Miko Peled, you can find his talk. It's 45 minutes, just very passionate account of the Holy Land Foundation case. This is called Injustice, the Story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. We have that at the church for sale as well. So John and Rachel, we get to hear a couple of songs from them before we dive into Rob and his beautiful presentation. John and Rachel.
Thank you.
So good to have you here. I'm still, my feet aren't touching the ground, even though my back is sore from hauling equipment in and out of the church and setting up the PA. But it's just,
you gotta get it out of your car later, right?
yeah, we still have to unload it. And you're going to be around to help. John and Rachel Nicholas, folks.
Thank you so much. All right. It's a little early in the morning still for this song, but we're going to go for it.
And Dean, we would love you to sing the chorus. Okay, good.
Feeling helpless, feeling hopeless, and nothing much makes sense. Well, you can run and hide, or point your finger, or sit upon the fence. Or you can grab your tools and bring a song and give the sweat of your brow. Come lend a hand, come one and all. Ain't no time like now, so put your back to it. Give it all you got. You'll have no regrets. You put your back to it. I don't know just why we're here and what we're supposed to do, but we're all here together, that much is true. No easy answers, no guarantees that what we build will last. No looking back, no giving up. Oh, we've got to hold fast. Sing with us. Put your back to it. Give it all you got. Give it all you got. You'll have no regrets. You'll have no regrets. You put your back to it. shortcuts, no magic pills. So roll up your sleeves and put your shoulder to the wheel. You just got to believe. The world is turning and time is passing, and there's work we must do. So ring your hammer, ring your bell, all together is true. So put your back to it, give it all you got. You'll have no regrets. Put your back to it, put your back to it, give it all you got. You'll have no regrets if you put your back to it.
Let's hear you.
Put your back to it. Give it all you got. You'll have no regrets. You put your back to it. You'll have no regrets. If you put your back to it.
Thank you, Dean. Good trouble, Johnny.
Well, I understand that Robert Shetterly has one of his portraits that he may talk about later is of John Lewis, congressman and civil rights leader.
Presente.
And wow,
Oh,
that's a big
we
doggy.
hear a dog.
He likes John Lewis too.
Yeah, he likes
Yeah.
John Lewis too.
That was my dog.
The summer that John Lewis died, I was inspired to write a song in honor of his legacy, and it's called Good Trouble. Go on now, don't be troubled. Put your doubts right out of your mind. You know where you can find me. I'll be 2 steps right behind. On the way to where we're going, on the highway of the kings. Some people call us dreamers, and they'll try to break our wings. Go make yourself some big noise, good trouble to light the way. I say glory, 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 may you live to see that day. We'll walk this road together, that long and arching line. Remember where you're going, if I should fall behind. Take stars and constellations, take maps and words to guide, and pass them down behind you. Plant seeds on every side. Go make yourself some big noise, good trouble to light the way. I say glory, 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 may you live to see that day. Go make your sparks of glory, go work for more than gold. 'Cause all the things you dream of are not yours alone to hold. 'Cause all the things you dream of are not yours alone to hold. Go make yourself some big noise, good trouble to light the way. I say glory, 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 may you live to see that day. I say glory, 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 glory. I say glory, 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 may you live to see that day.
Thank you. Dean.
Thank you, Dean.
John and Rachel Nicholas. I love that song. Love that song. And believe that the civil rights struggle of the 60s should take its place in the history of this country above the American Revolution. You know, it's just like such an important and magnificent moment in the arc of history of this country. Robert, I want to just, by way of introducing you, read some names off a list that you can't see in the camera, but it's a list of people who have received our Sacco and Vanzetti Award. And I just read this list to say that there's a whole lot of these who you have painted. And let me read them and welcome you to our humble auditorium and our humble forum here. It's just marvelous because I think that your work just so jibes with our work. So I'll start with, let's say 2000, Howard Zinn. And I'll go to now, Ruth Hamilton, Harry Landfield and Jane Polly, Rachel Corey. These 5 names are from the Greensboro massacre. Cesar Cauce, Michael Nathan, William Sampson, Sandra Smith, and James Waller. Lynn Stewart, Mumia Abu Jamal, Chuck Turner, Jim Harney of Maine, Mel and Joyce King, Truth and Justice Radio, Arnie King, Tarek Mehana, The Whistleblowers, Tina Cherry, Kathy Kelly, Medea Benjamin, S. Brian Wilson, Cindy Sheehan, Daniel Ellsberg, Julian Assange. And we add to that list our most recent awardees, which are the Holy Land Foundation. And here's the photos of the 5 and the poster. I wish that there was one more person here, and his name is Louis Randa. And Rob, if you don't know about Louis, he ran a place called the Peace Abbey, which is right here west of Boston. It was in Sherborne. Before it closed its doors, it couldn't pay the mortgage anymore. And it was a beautiful retreat center and tribute to peace and to just treatment of animals and to rebellion and civil disobedience. Louis Randa is an amazing personage, and he gives out an annual award that's called the Courage of Conscience Award. And I didn't get a chance to let him know about this presentation, but I will tell him about it, and he can watch it on the YouTube. So Louis, that's a shout out to you. And now to Rob, thank you so much for joining us from way up in Maine and being with us. We look forward to hearing you and seeing these beautiful images. Folks, Rob Shetterly.
Thanks, Dean. And thank you, Rachel and John, for that beautiful music. So many things have been touched on in the opening here that are reverberate with everything I've been doing. But Dean, I think you left out one name off of your Sacco Vanzetti list, at least that I know of a person I painted, and that was Willard Uphouse. Who I don't think I heard you read that name. In an extraordinary figure during the McCarthy era, and then both before and after. But what I want to do is just give you a little background. Yeah, 1980, right? Well, what I want to do is give you a little background about my project, Americans Who Tell the Truth project, and where it came from, its reasons, and then talk about a few of the people I've painted. There are so many now that it's impossible to talk about them all at one time. But and I'm sure most of your audience there will remember that in the wake of 9/11, actually within just a few hours, if you were listening to Donald Rumsfeld, the case was being made, the drums started beating to attack the country of Iraq as a response to the downing of the towers. And that propaganda, that series of lies, became a turning point in my life. I, like most of you, probably, have experienced this kind of thing through all of our adult lives. Ever since Vietnam, every military adventure that the United States has been involved in has involved lying to the people in one way or another. And all of us have spent a lot of time trying to think about how to respond to that and working very hard to respond to it. In most part, unsuccessfully, I would say. However, in the run up to the Iraq War, I was, once again found myself in a position of being really overwhelmed with both anger and grief about what was happening, to whom it was happening, how difficult it seemed to get in the way of it happening. And I kept thinking, what can I do at this moment to feel one, less alienated from this country, to feel less complicit, in another war crime by this country, because, when our country commits these crimes, we are made complicit with them just by being citizens of the country. And so what do we do? And I spent quite a bit of time in the fall of 2001 after 9/11, just ranting and driving everybody around me kind of crazy about how upset I was. And I kept thinking, I've got to respond to this in some way that is positive, take all this negative energy that I was feeling and somehow capture it and use it in a positive way rather than, be so negative in the way I was, expressing how I felt. And it took me several months to come up with a very simple idea. And the idea was to exercise people like Dick Cheney and George Bush and Rumsfeld and Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice and all those folks, exercise them from my head and my heart and replace them by making portraits of people that I admired who, had spent often a good part of their lives and their courage and their perseverance, insisting that this country live up to its own ideals, which has been and continues to be an enormous job. And so I painted a portrait, the very first portrait I painted of Walt Whitman. Actually, what I'm going to try to do is see if I can do this, is share my screen and we can actually look at some of these portraits. And
Can't hear.
Rob, you are muted, I believe. Can you hear me, Rob? I believe you went mute when you shared your screen.
Yep. Can't hear. Unmute.
okay, how's that?
Yes. Thanks, Rob.
Now let me see if I can get back here. I must have just
Rob, you're muted again. When you screen share, it mutes your.
It just happened again, Rob, but we did have screen share and your audio for a second there.
Well, I'll tell you what, I don't know why that's happening, but I'm going to stop sharing. I'll just tell you about some of these people. And I would encourage all of you to go to the Americans Who Tell the Truth website and look at the portraits. There are now, my goal, as I was saying somewhere in there, I don't know what you heard, was to paint 50 portraits. I had never painted a portrait. I'm a self-taught artist, and but I knew I could teach myself to do this. Each portrait is painted on a large wooden panel, 30 by 36 inches. And it isn't just the portrait, it has words scratched into the surface of the painting that are from each person I painted. And the first one I painted was Walt Whitman, who starts out the quote on his painting is from the preface to Leaves of Grass, where he says his own commandment to how to live in the world, where he says, "This is what you shall do: love the earth, the sun, and the animals, despise riches, hate tyrants, argue not concerning God, give alms to anyone who asks." And then he says, "Take off your hat to nothing known or unknown." And by that, he means that essentially all created things are equal. No one needs to lay down, take off their hat and bow down before anybody else. I see that Dean or someone else is sharing the screen, so maybe I can keep talking and you can also see these images. So I painted Walt Whitman, and at the time I thought that would be the only portrait. And then I noticed when I painted him that it changed how I felt entirely. I felt through him, I felt a kind of connection that I had been missing to something essential about the democratic spirit and this country. And so painting him was, when I was, after I'd done it, and I was talking to my wife about it as we put it up in the house, and I started to get pretty ranty again. She suggested to me that I paint a few more portraits, that I had been a much nicer person to live with when I had been working on that portrait. And I just looked at her and said, you're right. I'm going to paint 50 portraits. I'm going to call them Americans Who Tell the Truth, and then I'm going to give them all away. That last part was kind of like a invitation to levitation for me. I suddenly felt like I was going to divorce myself from this economy in a way through making these portraits that would, both in the people I honored who had done most of their work without recompense of one kind or another, and that I could make a metaphor for that by making these portraits and then giving them away, which I still intend to do. Although the number has become so great, there are almost 270 of them now. I've gone on for 21 years now painting these portraits. But let me tell you about just a couple of the people who've sort of set the stage for what this has been about for me and why it's become something that is not just a series of portraits, but it become a big educational project that is used in schools and colleges and places all over this country. But through that, but let me just talk about Sojourner Truth. Most of you probably know who she was. She was a slave, not a slave in the South, but a slave in upstate New York. And when New York finally outlawed slavery in 1827, which was just a generation before the Civil War, she was freed then, and she went from there. She went down to New York City, got a job working as a domestic in a white woman's house, and her name was not Sojourner Truth then. Her name was Isabella Baumfree, and she was, as a lot of you know probably, she was illiterate all her life. She was very religious. She heard voices that came to her and told her that what she should do in her life. And this voice came and said, "Your name shall be Sojourner." She knew what the word sojourner meant. And the very next day, she just started walking away from that job in New York City, walking east onto Long Island. And she met a woman who said, "What's your name?" She said, "Sojourner." "What's your last name?" She didn't have one. And the voice came back and gave her the name Sojourner Truth, which she then took as her destiny, that her name was her destiny, and that she should spend the rest of her life traveling and telling people the truth. And the major truths for her at that period before the Civil War were the abolition of all slaves and women's rights, which she dedicated her life to. The quote that's on her painting, and let's see if you can, it's there, but I will recite it. So each portrait has this quote scratched into the surface of it. And the reason we know words from Sojourner is that she was such a magnificent speaker and such a great improviser that she, whenever she spoke, people followed her around and wrote down what she said. And she said she was out in Ohio in the 1850s at one of these big Chautauqua-like events, and where she said, "Now I hears talking about the Constitution and the rights of man, and I comes up and I takes hold of this Constitution, and it's mighty big, and I feels for my rights." You know, I love that. It's almost like the Constitution is a big fuzzy animal, and she's got her hands on it, and she's looking, you know, in its fur, you know, for the rights that should be hers. She says, so. Says, "I feels for my rights, but there ain't any there." And then I says, "God, what ails this Constitution?" And he says to me, "Sojourner, there is a little weasel in it." You know, that, which what she said there, which she meant as a, you know, kind of sarcastic, ironic joke, was anything but a joke. It was that here was just a magnificent document that was meant to bring, you know, justice and equality and freedoms, you know, to all people. And the only people who got it were well-to-do white men who owned property. It was like, you know, when the Constitution was signed and had that outcome, it set the stage for what would become sort of the worst and best of American history. The worst was obvious, to have made this declaration of ideals and rights and then given them only to well-to-do white men. You know, the best was that other people, marginalized people who had been left out, you know, they were going to have to be the ones who insisted that the country live up to those ideals. You know, that the chasing of that weasel would be the work of, you know, Sojourner's time, and of course, it's now the work of our time. And it's been a continuous process. And what I have realized at some point in the process of making these portraits is that, you know, that's what it's about. It's about the people who chase the weasel, and what they've tried to accomplish and what they have accomplished by doing that. And let me just tell you a couple of stories that, you know, I when I began painting this, I painted a lot of icons, some people we all know from the 19th century, like Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Jane Addams, Ida B. Wells, you know, Mother Jones, you know, on and on. And I painted these people, and I was learning an enormous amount about their lives and who they were, not just as icons, but as real flawed people like all of us. And then I got so interested in what I was realizing when I was doing it, that I wasn't going to stop at 50 portraits, that I was finding out so much about the necessary trouble, as we say, you know, for this culture and this political society, and also how power works, and how those contradictions between power and the ideals of the country have put us in the place we are, and have led us to make, you know, incredible, well, we call them mistakes. They're not really mistakes. They're very purposeful. But then what was necessary in order to, you know, to move away from them. So, and as I went forward, I began to find all these stories that I knew nothing about. And let me just tell you a couple of them. One is that if you could find this portrait of a 16-year-old girl named Barbara Johns, Johns. Barbara Johns was a junior at Moton High School in Farmville, Virginia in 1951. It was a all-black school, you know, it was during the era of separate but equal. And so she was really upset about what was happening there because, not so much because of the separation, not because of the segregation in the schools, but because she was getting an inferior education, and she knew that. She knew that her future could really depend on the quality of her education. And so she wanted to change that situation. And what she decided to do, she kept secret for a long time because she thought that if people knew what she was going to do, they would stop her and it wouldn't happen. But her idea was to first get the principal out of the school so that her idea could work. And that she did accomplish that one morning by calling the principal, a black man, and disguising her voice and saying that some kids from Moton High School, the black school, were down in the center of the white town and they were raising a ruckus and that he should do something about it. So he got in his car and drove away. And that was something that probably any black leader would want to do, is make sure black kids weren't causing problems in the white section of town. So he left, and then she had prepared all these notes that said there was going to be an emergency meeting in the cafeteria of the school for everybody, and that all the teachers should come there immediately with all the students. And she had forged the principal's signature on this note. Everybody came there, and then wondering what the heck was going on, and Barbara stood up and gave this passionate speech about the importance of education in their lives and what they weren't getting. I mean, this school was, had twice the number of students in it than it was built for. It had some old broken down, school buses as classrooms. It had little heat. It had no library, all that kind of stuff. And she gave this speech, and she said, I'm going to walk out of the school right now and go to the superintendent and demand a better school. And I want all of you to come with me. So 400 kids walked out of that school behind Barbara to the white superintendent. And when they got there, she went into him and said, this is what we want. And the superintendent said, you better go back to your school right now, or I will suspend all of you, and your parents will lose their jobs. It's a typical thing that happened during the civil rights era when black people stood up for civil rights. Often the first technique to shut them down was to get them fired. So Barbara said, no, that's not the way it's going to work. We're going to go on strike until we get a better school. So the kids went on strike. The black community got behind them, and she wasn't demanding integration. She was demanding just separate yet really equal. Some lawyers in Richmond heard about what was going on down there, and they came to Farmville and said, Barbara, we want to take your case. One of the most important things here is that when the lawyers showed up, these are two black lawyers, by the way, they're actually very significant. Well, I'll get to that in a second. They came to her and they, it's interesting. They didn't go to the principal. They didn't go to the parents. They didn't go to the teachers. They went to the person with the courage to call out the problem. Again and again, what you see is the person with the courage, to name the problem and to stand up becomes the teacher for everybody. So they went to her and they said, we'd like to take your case, although we think it should be a case about integration because you'll never get an equal school as long as they're separate. She said, okay, let's do integration. Well, as soon as they made that demand, the Ku Klux Klan was burning crosses in her yard. Her life was threatened. All that stuff happened. That case stayed in the courts for 3 years, and then it was bundled into the 5 most important cases of Brown versus Board. And what's so significant here, for me anyway, was that here is this incredibly important case. It started with a 16-year-old girl, and it was, then part of that lawsuit, and maybe the most significant part of that lawsuit, which, at least theoretically at the time, integrated our schools. 16-year-old girl. Of course, it was argued by Thurgood Marshall, and it turned out the 2 black lawyers, Spotswood Robinson and Oliver Hill, who had come from Richmond to interview Barbara in the first place, were classmates of Thurgood Marshall's at Howard, and they were all students of Charles Hamilton Houston, who would have been the lead lawyer, but he had a heart attack and died in 1950. So Thurgood Marshall, who was his student, picked up his banner and carried it forward. This is the kind of story that is key to our, country's history for a lot of reasons, and particularly though, because it shows again and again, and I'm going to tell you another story right now about how important it is that young people speak up and young people stand up, and often they're the ones who, in doing so, cause significant change. So the next person, I just want to tell you a little story about Claudette Colvin and make a couple of points about, again, what these portraits try to cause to, or at least allow to happen. Claudette Colvin was a 15-year-old girl in 1955, growing up in Montgomery, Alabama. You'll remember that in December of 1955 was when Rosa Parks sat on the bus in Montgomery. And in Mississippi, in 1955, in August, was when Emmett Till was lynched and tortured and killed. In March of 1955, a 15-year-old girl, also in Montgomery, Claudette Colvin, refused to move on a bus. She was sitting, like Rosa Parks, in the first row of the black section of the bus, where she was supposed to be by law. When the white section filled up, the bus driver ordered her to move and stand in the back. She had just gone through what was then called Negro History Week at her all-black high school. And she was not in a mind to be told to move somewhere so a white person could sit down. So she said in a loud voice on this bus, "The Constitution allows me to sit here." I mean, you might want to think a minute about how that would go over on a bus in Montgomery. I mean, these are the kind of things that, in 1955, you do that and people get killed, their houses bombed, their churches bombed, their schools bombed. Those things happen, when white power and supremacy are threatened. Claudette was given a few chances to move, and she kept refusing. By the way, there's an interesting sort of sidelight was that the seat across from her across the aisle was actually open. So the white person could have sat down there. But the law said that a white person could not sit across the aisle from a black person because it implied equality. So she was told to move. She kept saying, "The Constitution allows me to sit here." The bus driver stopped the bus, got off, called the police. They came, they dragged her off the bus. The whole time she's saying, "The Constitution allows me." And then she's taken to jail. There's a whole lot more to this story, but it's important to know that the case that went to the Supreme Court was not Rosa Parks' case. She actually didn't want to be part of that case at the beginning, but it was Claudette Colvin's case and a couple of other women who had done the same thing. So the law was changed as it was, not because of what Rosa Parks did directly, but because of what a 15-year-old girl did. And this is, again, just like with Barbara Johns, extremely important to me and should be to all of us about how power is shaped inside, a culture that doesn't respect that kind of power, and often a child's power to do something. Later on, quite recently, really, a man named Philip Hose from Portland, Maine, wrote a book about Claudette, Twice Towards Justice, Claudette Colvin, Twice Towards Justice. It won the National Book Award. And when they won the award, Philip was invited to New York to receive the award and to speak, and he invited Claudette, who was then living in her 70s and living in Brooklyn, New York. He invited her to come with him. And after he received the award, all the press people there didn't go to him, they went up to Claudette. And they wanted to know why in the world she didn't move. What was she thinking when she knew how dangerous it could be? Surely her parents had taught her that, when you stand up against white power, you're risking your life, and that her life at the age of 15 was more precious than anything she might accomplish on that bus. And she said, "I wanted to move." She said, "I started to get up off my seat to move to the back, and I felt Harriet Tubman's hand on my shoulder, pushing me back down." She said, I tried to get up again, and I felt Sojourner Truth's hand on my other shoulder, pushing me back down. I had to ask myself, what would those women do? And of course, there was only one answer. And she said, history glued me to my seat. One of the things that's so important, or has become important to me, in the painting of all these portraits and telling these stories, is just as Claudette had heard those stories in Negro History Week, which had happened just previous to her sitting on that bus, is that then she wasn't acting alone. She had the spirits of those courageous women there to, enhance her courage, give her courage, build her spirit, make her feel like she wasn't as isolated as she actually was. And so once she communicated with their spirit, she was able to act with that incredible courage. What we want to do with this project is provide lots of examples for young people so when they're faced, as we all are sooner or later in some big or small way, with moments that require courage, and often more than courage, perseverance over some extended period of time, that we have those spirits to help us along the way. So let me tell you one more story, and then, actually, I'll tell you, and then I want to just read a couple of quotes. But all of you, this is your community church is full with all this great music and great examples of music, and I'm sure you often sing the songs of Woody Guthrie. And maybe you all know this story, but I don't think I did until I became more acquainted with him. Is that, during the once the United States got into the Second World War, Woody wanted to sign up. He wanted to do his part, and so he he did just that. He signed up, and he was assigned to work as a deckhand on a merchant marine ship. And the ship he worked on was a troop carrier. The troop carriers went across the ocean from the east coast of the United States to deliver all kinds of weaponry, soldiers, medical, food, medicine, all the stuff that was necessary to run a war was carried across on these ships in these huge convoys. And in the center of the convoy would be all the ships that are carrying the supplies and the men. And then out around them are the battleships to try to protect them from the German U-boats, which every night would often try to attack the convoy, shoot their torpedoes past the battleships if they could, and into the center where the troop ships and the supplies are, and sink them. And the battleships, of course, are dropping depth charges and fighting back, and the whole scene is chaos. So Woody is on one of these troop carriers, and the first night out there, they're under attack. And he's thinking that they're down below him. He's up on the deck. Down below are 3,000 men in the hold of this ship, in the complete dark, scared to death. They know that if a torpedo hits that ship, that the water will fill the space they're in immediately, and they won't have a chance. So Woody's thinking about that, and he thinks about how frightened they must be. And so he decides to get his guitar and go down in the hold with the men. And he sings with them all night. You all know the effect that can have. Instead of being totally isolated in your fear, if you're singing together with a group of people, it changes the morale. It also changes the level of courage you can access. Woody got quite a reputation, on these ships for willing to sacrifice what may be his own survival to be with the men in these situations and to get them all singing together. So one night on a different ship, he's singing with the men, and he could hear behind a bulkhead voices coming from another part of the ship, trying to sing along with the men that he's with. And he went to the captain and he says, "Captain, I hear other voices. Let's open the doors and let everybody in together." And the captain says, "I can't do that." And when he said, "What do you mean you can't do that?" And he said, "Well, regulations." When he said, "What kind of regulation would that be?" And the captain said, "Well, those are the black soldiers. They're not allowed to be in with the white soldiers." And Woody says, so you're not going to open the door? He says, no. I said, well, I guess I'm not going to sing anymore tonight. And he walks away. And the captain, feels suddenly very differently and chases after him and grabs him and says, well, look, we'll make an exception tonight. We'll open the door. So he goes down, opens the door, and the black soldiers are integrated with the white soldiers. This is the first time in World War II that our soldiers were integrated. And it's that the ability at a certain moment, to both with courage and moral power to access a kind of power that otherwise would not have been available. I mean, you think of, no politicians had been able to do that, even if they were trying to integrate our soldiers up to that point. There are, about Woody Guthrie, there are so many incredible stories, but let me say one other thing. I spend a lot of time in schools, and I often ask kids, if I show them this portrait, who is this man? Nobody knows. And then I say, well, do you know the song, This Land Is Your Land? And they, everybody knows it. And then you ask them, well, can you sing it? And they will sing it if I ask them to, and they will sing the first 2 or 3 verses. That's it. And I'm sure Dean and Rachel and John knows that, there's a lot more to the song than those first verses, which are so wonderful about how big and beautiful and great this land is, that it belongs to you, it belongs to me, and isn't that magnificent? But that was the setup for the song and the last verses, to get into the verse that I've scratched into the top of his portrait. One bright sunny morning in the shadow of the steeple by the relief office, I saw my people. As they stood hungry, I stood there wondering if this land was made for you and me. That whole song was leading up to that verse and that if. That was the question of the song. And, he'd gone through the Depression, he'd gone through the Dust Bowl, he had seen this terrible suffering and inequality, and he really wanted to ask that question. He wanted to set it up by saying how great it was that we lived in this beautiful place and we all owned it together. But then he wanted to ask the big question. It's interesting that in our schools, and it's almost universal, I don't know if I've been in a school where the kids know that last verse, where, you wonder who made that decision, to only teach the first verses of this song. And of course, you can see how, by doing that, how it enforces a kind of propaganda about who we are as a people and what kind of a country we live in. And also make sure that we don't ask the important questions about equality, about capitalism, about how democracy really works, and who has freedoms and who doesn't. Let me just talk for a minute about a couple of people whose names came up earlier. One of the Dean mentioned Rob McCall, who lives right here in the next town to me in Blue Hill, Maine, and was the minister for many, many years at the Congo Church here, and is a friend to obviously you guys and I'm sure some others. And you just heard him read an Awanajo Almanac and got a flavor of the kind of voice he has. Let me, that's not Rob McCall, that's Bob Kohler, another guy from Chicago. Well, let's see if we can find Rob McCall. Should be a little bit lower. Go down a little bit. Down a little lower to the, oh, there he is. There he is right here, right next to Coleman McCarthy. Yeah. So let me just read the quote that's on his painting. This quote came from one of his sermons delivered at that Congo church, and is, in a way is as important perhaps as any quote in the entire series. And he says, I don't care what you believe, frankly. I don't care if you believe that Christ was actually bodily resurrected from the condition of being clinically dead, or if you believe it's all a silly myth. I don't care what you believe. I care what you love. If you love the Creator and the creatures and your neighbor and yourself and your family and your enemy and the earth and the great mystery, then what in the world do you need beliefs for? And if you don't love these, what earthly good will beliefs do you anyway? Rob McCall was a man who was always about naming what we love. And if we have neglected what we love, he's about naming what we should be loving if we want to survive on this planet and also survive in peace and harmony with other people and other species. You know, I started out by talking about how angry and grief-struck I was. Those were the emotions that led to the paintings of the portraits. And that's true, but when you examine that anger, you know, the anger about an injustice and the anger about that kind of violation, what you realize is that behind that anger, behind that violation is an insult to love, the things we love, the people we want to stand in solidarity with, the people and the conditions and the species that we would all know that we should love and do love. And then when that love has been violated, it can trigger that anger at that injustice. And Rob McCall is all about finding, you know, lots and lots of ways to express that love. You talked about Frances Perkins. I thought that was really interesting because I painted a portrait of Frances Perkins, and Dean mentioned that, you know, she was the Secretary of Labor, the first woman in a cabinet, and also she's, I think, probably the only cabinet person who's ever a Congress has ever tried to impeach, you know, because as Dean also mentioned, you know, those ideas of the New Deal about work safety, minimum wage, 8-hour day, you know, health situations, you know, all that, and Social Security, those were her ideas, you know, and FDR made her Secretary of Labor in order that she would push them and see if he could get them through the Congress, get them passed. And she did for the most part. The only real idea that was hers that she wanted during the New Deal, which didn't happen, was universal health care, which is interesting. And the same forces that are against it now were against it then. So she was, you know, an extraordinary figure. And you know, one of the things that's so, I think, key about her and the way she understood how a democracy has to function if it's going to be successful is that the conditions need to exist that every person, if they're willing to work, and maybe even if they aren't, you know, needs to be afforded the possibility of having dignity in the society, that they have health care, they have a minimum wage that is not just, you know, allows them to scrape by, but to live with some dignity. They have a decent education. They have prospects for the future. You know, all those things that a person needs to feel a sense of self-respect and then dignity. That if the society can't, you know, make that happen, make those conditions happen, it will fail as a democracy. And so that was her intention. And that was really FDR's intention. And so that's why that moment in our history was so important, because it understood that, you know, later on that as we, you know, became much more like an oligarchy, that idea disappears entirely because it doesn't care, you know, and it was also the case before her that it didn't care what happened to so many people as we went through the, you know, the Depression. Let me just then mention, I think, 2 quotes. You know, one of the things that I'm able to do with this series is get into schools, which is interesting because a lot of schools don't necessarily agree with the politics of either me or a lot of the people I painted, but what they do appreciate is the art. And if the art seems serious enough or authentic enough, they will actually entertain the ideas then in a different way than if I just made cartoons of people and scribbled quotes with a magic marker. But let's look at the picture of Wendell Berry. And I'm sure a lot of you all know who Wendell Berry is. He's still alive. He's a farmer from Port Royal, Kentucky, who's a great poet, a great novelist, a great essayist, probably one of the greatest voices in terms of defining an ethic of how we need to live on the land and with the land and with other species if we want to survive here. This quote, though, that's on his painting came from an essay he wrote at the end of the first Gulf War in 1991, right as we started the period of sanctions in Iraq, which were so incredibly deadly, not to perpetrators of torture and violence, but to the people, the civilians, the children of Iraq. And he said, the most alarming sign of the state of our society now is that our leaders have the courage to sacrifice the lives of young people in war, but have not the courage to tell us that we must be less greedy and less wasteful. When I am in schools, I get kids, in middle school and high school to examine the quotes. And I give them this quote, and I ask them, well, what in the world is he talking about? What are these kinds of courage? These, what is the difference between the courage that allows a leader to sacrifice the life of a young person in war, but why would they be lacking the courage if they're willing to do that, in some cases, sacrifice their own children? How is it that they can't say that we need to be less greedy and less wasteful? And you ask kids to figure that one out, and they do. They figure it out and they begin to understand that, well, what's really important then, to them is the maintenance of an economy that is built on waste and greed rather than the lives of young people. And that they're willing to sacrifice the lives of young people to enable the continuation of that kind of an economy. And that we are willing to, in a sense, build our ethics, based on power and profit and control, and let that kind of economy determine our ethical behavior rather than our relationship with our own kids and the kids of other people. There's another quote which I use, which is similar in a way. It's from Marian Wright Edelman, and I'm sure a lot of people, know who she is. The Children's Defense Fund, who she started, which is, if there's such a thing as a good lobbyist, Marian Wright Edelman, and she certainly is a good lobbyist who lobbies for the welfare of poor children, for better nutrition, food, schools, adoption policies, all that kind of stuff. And she asked the question with her quote. She asked the question, "What's wrong with our children?" And then she answers her own question. She said, "It's adults telling children to be honest while they are lying and cheating. It's adults telling children to be nonviolent while they are marketing and glorifying violence. I believe adult hypocrisy is the biggest problem that children face in America." That, again, pinpoints the problem with, what happens when you allow an economy and decisions that enhance economy to be more important than your own, moral stars about, how to make a decision or not to. That you would, in other words, you would say to kids, it's important to be nonviolent, and then the answer to it is to market and glorify violence, because you feel trapped by the culture to be doing these things. There's Marian Wright Edelman just coming up there on the right. So who else did I'm going to mention one thing, and then if there's some questions or comments, I would love to have them. I'm leaving tomorrow for Chicago to unveil the newest portrait, which is not yet on the website. It's of a woman named Kali Rubahi, who's a anthropologist from Purdue University, who has been studying the toxic health effects of America's war making in Iraq. I mean, last summer, the United States passed this PACT Act, an enlightened piece of legislation to take care of soldiers who were exposed to burn pits in Afghanistan and Iraq, and all the cancers and respiratory diseases that they got from all those toxicities in the air and the water and everywhere. What was not talked about when the PACT Act was passed, was what happened to the people who live there? What about the Iraqis? What about the Afghanis? What about their health? They're not on rotation. They go back to these places. I mean, they live in these places. They have to eat the food that's grown in those places, go on breathing that air and the dust and all that stuff. And so Kali Rubahi has been studying the extremely high prevalence of birth defects in places like Fallujah, Ramadi, Basra. Sometimes as high as 20% of kids are born with birth defects, and a very high level of other diseases that are there and conditions. And this becomes, to me, extremely important, because this is when we left Vietnam, a lot of people, are not aware of the ongoing damage done to people in that country by Agent Orange. And this is a similar kind of situation, that we left all these things behind, not just in the burn pits, but depleted uranium, white phosphorus, all the weapons that we use, and the heavy metals and things that were involved with them. It's a terrible thing, and we need to take responsibility for it. I think I'm gonna stop there. I've got the 265 portraits. I can tell you a story about every one of them, but instead, I would love to hear some more music or some other conversation.
Yeah. Rob Shetterly, thank you so much. This is so rich and wonderful. And you're not only a painter, but such an amazing storyteller and exponent of all these people that we've seen. Thank you. I could listen to this forever. I told Rob earlier that our talks have no specific time limit. Daniel Ellsberg went on for about 2 hours and 15 minutes when he received our Sacco and Vanzetti Award in 2020. But there's two things that keep us from that. One is the smell of lunch that pervades through this auditorium that Luis Guzman, our Salvadoran cook, has prepared for us, that's waiting. The other thing is the prospect of one more song from John and Rachel before we go into a question and answer. Thank you, Rob. This just is so rich and beautiful and just perfectly in line with us here at Community Church. I really hope that we get a chance to receive you physically here at the church sometime soon. But let's say thank you again to John and Rachel and hear one more song. Oh, yeah.
Robert, I hope you can hear us. Tom O'Donovan from Harbor Square Gallery in Rockland sends his warmest regards. And,
Nice.
I know that Rachel used to manage that gallery for about 8 years.
Yeah.
And I know we've seen your work there.
And it's
I'm-
definitely an honor to be with you here today.
Thank you.
I'm only disappointed that we didn't get to meet in person, but
Yeah.
I know we're
Next
only here.
time.
We left a few days early, otherwise we would not have been here because of the snow. Well, this song ties in with what Robert was talking about, how important it is for young people to to take on the baton and do their part. And that's what I wrote the song about. You know, we have a daughter who's 36. We have nieces, we have friends who have children, you know, young adults and teenagers and children. And, you know, we worry about their future because it's looking kind of grim.
So we need to give them hope.
Yes.
And I
this-
think that's what this song's about.
Yes, and it's called Sure and True. And it's the only song we've ever written that kind of sounds like a hymn.
May your heart be sure and true. May your troubles be far and few. May you find your way to see that day. May your heart be sure and true. May you find the river and rest. May your peace be more than less. May you drink until you've had your fill. May you find the river and rest. May the road you walk be clear. May you have a song to hear that will soothe your way all through the fray. May the road you walk be clear. Some words are handed down the whole wide world around, and with these words I wish for you, your heart be sure and true. May you go before us now, as we fall behind somehow. Remember what's been said, go on ahead. May you go before us now. And with these words I wish for you, your heart be sure and true. May your heart be sure and true.
Thank you. Don't go away yet. Don't. That's beautiful. Is it called Blessing?
Sure and
That's
true.
what it could be called. It evokes one of my favorite songs on YouTube. It's Pete Seeger at age 94 doing Bob Dylan's Forever Young. And I encourage all of you to look at this every time I think about it. I get choked up. Just check it out. Pete Seeger, Forever Young, and he's like in his 90s, and he's just growling basically. But he's backed up by a choir of kids from Beacon, New York, and it's in a remarkable, just beautiful. Check it out, everybody. I want to point out that we're all wearing these incredible embroidered shirts. They come from a lady named Hilda Caballero from El Higueral, El Salvador, and they are artwork. They're pieces of beautiful art. And I was just there in January and brought back 45 of them, and a bunch of them are here at the church and the rest are at home in the basement. And if you're interested in having a look at these They're just all just incredible, wonderful. I'm thinking when these beautiful paintings come down of actually having a gallery exhibition of Hilda Caballero's embroidered shirts. I go to thrift stores and buy solid colored shirts and jean jackets and take a suitcase full of them every time I go to this village, and pick up a suitcase full of embroidered shirts that she's done for us. Anyway, I just happened to notice that the three of us were wearing them and had to mention that. Thank you so much, John and Rachel.
Thank you.
And let's go on to Q&A. Just Rob, I'd never heard that story about Woody Guthrie, and that is so remarkable. And the way you related all these stories about all these people is remarkable. And thank you for the shout out to Phil Hose, who's a friend of mine from Portland, Maine. And we have never had Phil present or speak here. And this is my kick in the butt to get in touch with Phil and have him speak. He's authored a number of wonderful books, especially about young people and young activists. That book that he wrote it really sticks out in my mind, and we have a copy of it somewhere here amongst our thousands of books here at the church. So I wanted to open it up and see if there was somebody who had a question or a comment or a shout out to Rob. Susan Mirsky, take it away. Are you muted, Susan?
Yes.
There you are.
Thank you so much for this program today. And I want to say thank you so much, Robert. I met you a number of years ago at World Fellowship, and we went on a wonderful walk together. And I was so impressed with what you had done, and got your book and gave it to my son, who was then teaching history, initially in high school, then junior high, then high school again. And it was so important for him to share your book with his students as a way of thinking about history from the bottom up, rather than from the top down, but from the bottom up. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. I remember that. I'll actually be back at World Fellowship this summer in August, and I'll be bringing Medea Benjamin with me. She's will be on a book tour this summer, and she's coming to Maine, and then is going to be coming to World Fellowship. I think it's around the 19th and 20th of August, and so I will bring her up, and we'll do a couple of programs together. I just want to use this opportunity when you mentioned the book to do a little, shameless advertising, which is that we now have some new books. One called Portraits of Racial Justice, with 50 portraits and essays by a number of the people in the book, and then a newer one called Portraits of Earth Justice, with again 50 portraits of environmental and climate activists and essays by a lot of the people in the books. And so, and they're beautiful. They're put out by New Village Press, all in color. And we made, our next one may be about militarism and peacemaking. So anyway, thank you very much. And I am looking forward to being back at World Fellowship this summer.
Amar, are there any other? Let me give a shout out to Amar Ahmad, who is our tech person behind the screen. Pay no attention to the man behind the screen. But Amar is also a very astute political mind and leader of lots of webinars and host of some of our programs now here at the church. Are there anybody else?
Well, I have a question.
Amar has a question.
Robert, I noticed, I spoke at the church a few months ago, and when I spoke here, I spoke a lot about a book I had read by James Douglas, and I noticed you had made a portrait about him. So I'm going to put it on the screen. I just wanted to ask you, how did you come to make this? How did you come to know James Douglas's work, and what made you make this portrait?
Yeah, thank you. James, I've been, well, where to start? I lived through those tumultuous years of the 1960s and all the assassinations of those years, Malcolm X, King, Bobby Kennedy, and have always doubted, for very good reasons, the official stories about these assassinations. And when I discovered James Douglas's book about the Kennedy assassination, the Jack Kennedy assassination, I was so impressed with the research he'd done and the arguments he was making and the history he was presenting, that I thought that even if there may be some details in there that are still to be defined, the overall thrust of it was undeniable. And so it turned out that we were both at the University of Syracuse to speak at the same time. And so I met him there, and I heard him give a talk about his book. And then I collared him and said I'd like to paint his portrait. It's probably a lot of you know that just recently there's the case of the assassination of Malcolm X has been opened up. It's been the two men who were imprisoned for killing him. Probably, I mean, the idea was that they were agents of of Islam, who and had killed him for that reason, were not guilty. That it was probably a conspiracy that involved both the CIA and the FBI and the New York police. And it may be that we're actually going to get some answers about that. And I'm hoping that when this happens, some further investigations will be possible. And if you don't know, and there's another book which is also really important about this field is William Pepper's book about the King assassination. This actually went to trial in 1999 in Memphis, to prove that James Earl Ray was not the killer, that he was set up. And the King family brought the case because they didn't believe he was guilty. And they won the case. They asked for $100 and they won the case, and they showed that people in the special forces, the CIA, the FBI, the Memphis police had all been involved, in the killing of King. So, I mean, this facing this history of ours is extremely important, that we do this, and that we find out, what these agencies and sort of people are very, there's a lot of danger using the term deep state these days, but it is there, and they do these things, and it's important we know the truth about them.
Thanks, Robert. I just want to take this moment really quickly to mention that James Douglas right now, he's working on another book about the assassinations of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Dr. Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X, and
Right.
how they were all killed by the same people. So people could keep their eye out for that book, or they could read its previous books. But thank you.
Yeah, and he works in a Catholic worker house in Birmingham.
Catholic Worker House in Birmingham. It's remarkable. I really love this website, Rob. It really is an incredible education on a big cross-section of remarkable activist folks. Are there any other questions on the on the Zoom. And looks like we're all set here. Just as a way of conclusion.
Maurice Herchett has a question.
Maurice. Go ahead, Morris. I didn't see you. Okay.
It's Mayor's Herchert, and I'm from Heartland, Michigan. And I just wanted to let Robert Shetterly know that I'm eventually coming back to his website to get some more note cards, because I had such fun over the last 3 years sending these for birthdays and everything. And they're not my usual that I send. And they're all looking at me like, why are you sending us this stuff? But I believe in your message of truth. And I know that we're not getting the truth also. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Dorothy.
Hi, I just want to thank Robert again, as other people have. I was very happy at World Fellowship to get to see many of his portraits around the dining room there. And I'm happy to hear that he may be there again. I plan to be there again this summer. And I hope other people like Dean would pass the word that there is going to be a pre-Labor Day music time again at World Fellowship this summer. And we all should appreciate your work, Robert. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I want to live in Maine. It sounds wonderful up there with all these wonderful people.
It's certainly been a rich set of connections this Sunday morning with the state of Maine.
Yes, yes.
And
I guess I'll add Heather Cox Richardson. Today she sent out the most wonderful photograph on the weekends. If you get her letters to America that come from Maine, you get wonderful photographs often.
Yeah, she's on my list, by the way.
Yes, the sooner the better.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dean, my hand thing doesn't work. This is Mary Lynn.
Mary Lynn, take it away. Hi, Mary Lynn.
This has just been one of, if not the most inspiring and educational, I don't know, programs I've seen in the many years I've attended the church. And I'm just wondering if there's some way we couldn't do a whole evening. Actually, I'm thinking like a whole weekend, and make specific outreach invitations to, people like AFSC and MAPA and all the activist groups, and get in touch with some of the younger activist groups. We just had 2 incredible young 10-year-olds from Bedford who won the banner, Black History Banner prize in Arlington, and their work will be hung. And, there are these very young people who really know their history, who really know about Black struggles in ways that I don't ever remember 10-year-olds knowing about, and they're so articulate. But anyway, I would just love to see an entire evening, if not a weekend, where we really target some groups. And if there's any way I could help with that, I would be more than happy to do that, whether that means, energy on the tube, or if it's money or whatever it is, because this has just been so rich today. And I agree with you. It's not just the wonderful artwork, but the manner of presentation has been just incredible. Thank you so much.
By the way, thank you for that. The First Church in Cambridge actually has a show of 11 of the portraits right now. I was just there last weekend to unveil the portrait of Harriet Jacobs, an escaped slave who wrote the book of Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. And we had an amazing turnout of people, including several of the people who were in the portraits themselves, came to that event. So if you want to, that's at least in the meantime, First Church in Cambridge is a great place to go and see some of these portraits and get a sense of what they look like.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Lynn. First Church in Cambridge, corner of Garden Street and Mason Street, right on the Cambridge Common there. I'm going to go see that myself, the first chance I get. That's magnificent, and that's also the home of Mass Peace Action, and I look forward to seeing those portraits. Rob, a shout out to you. This came up on such short notice, and it's just been so rich being with you. Thank you, John and Rachel Nicholas. Thank you for beautifying, embellishing. I say that word, and it's like usually you hear that. Often you hear that word like George Santos embellishing his resume, but it's the wrong use. It's the wrong use of that word, embellishing. Embellecer in Spanish is to beautify. And that's what Robert and John and Rachel have done for us on this day at Community Church. And let's say that meeting at the building is over all over this world. Meeting at the building soon be over all over this world.
Thank you so much.
We hope to see you again. Next week, we have Katie Miranda. She will be interviewing Bashar Nasser, who is the director of the Museum of the Palestinian People in Washington, D.C. It should be just a really wonderful and very unusual, different program where we get to meet two people, not just one. And it's again on a very arts-based themed Museum of the Palestinian People, features Palestinian art and handiwork, and also the political reality of the presence of Palestine. Visit Palestine. Let me show you. This is a gift from Linda Cohen down on Martha's Vineyard, who owns that beautiful store that I've never seen, but we have a bunch of her products here. Come and see us on a Wednesday. We have open house every Wednesday at noon. We serve pupusas, which are El Salvador's delicacy. And we give you, if you want, a tour of our building. Third floor has all of Bob Datilio's mountain of books that we haven't really library-ized yet, but it also has Jerry Kaplan's work. He has beautifully cataloged and preserved and archived an enormous amount of Sacco and Vanzetti materials. Fourth floor is our new tenant, the History Project, which documents and preserves and archives Boston's LGBT history. Fifth floor is our own archives of the Community Church of Boston, 103 years of magnificent history of presenting speakers and doing good trouble. To quote John Lewis, the late John Lewis, who we didn't even talk about, Rob, and to quote very much here with us, John Nicholas. Goodbye, everybody. Come to a Sunday and enjoy lunch.